So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to build an FPV quadcopter. Now this is going to be a beginner build video where I'll cover every single step as efficient and as detailed as possible and hopefully make it full of information. And not only that, I'll give you some tips and tricks that I've learned over the past couple years building and what to look out for and what to kind of avoid. Now, this quadcopter here has a bunch of components that I have tested in the past and right now is on a great price. So this is the most bang for your buck FPV freestyle / cinematic quadcopter. Now, let's talk about some of the components that we're going to be using, and you're going to be quite surprised at the prices that we're going to be using here. Now, I found this ESC a while ago. It's for $32. Now, a 4-in-1 ESC with this sized FETs and it just looks this nice and massive for 32 bucks is pretty insane. So this is on a deal. Nobody really knew the brand, so nobody really bought it, but there's only a couple manufacturers in the market and they just probably had it done by Airbot because it looks like Airbot's design, and that's what really does most of the high-end ESCs here. Now for flight controller here, I've salvaged a SpeedyBee flight controller. This is an all-in-one flight controller, so the connection is going to be pretty interesting because as you can tell, this has no connectors like the ESC. So we're going to do a little bit of a different kind of setup here, which I think you'll probably find pretty interesting because this is an all-in-one flight controller. But it's not only an all-in-one flight controller. This is like an insane deal here, and let me explain why. This has Bluetooth built in, and it has a 9-volt regulator for your VTX, and it's only like 37 bucks, which is insane. So we're going to be using this flight controller for this build, and it's going to be an absolute beast here. Now for the frame here, we're using the iFly XL5 frame. I think it's called the X. It's linked down below anyways. This is a really great frame I've had for a while, but I really wanted to rebuild it. So I actually took everything off of it. It used to be, I think, my ESC testing quad back then. And I've wanted to really do a proper makeover, and this is going to be it right here. So this is a really good frame overall. It's a 5-inch frame, and it's going to be perfect for your GoPro and just about everything. I've also 3D printed these, which will be linked down below. For example, this here will stick on the back standoffs and hold video transmitter's antenna to make it overall clean. And I've also 3D printed this here, and the links to these 3D printed files are down below. Instead of zip tying it to the standoff, this is going to be really nice. It's just going to fit there and hold it. And this will actually reduce the chances of one of the propellers striking the battery's cables because it'll just hold it really nicely into place on the side. Once we get into that step, you'll actually see that. For video transmitter, I'm using the Rush FPV Ultimate Plus. This is an insane transmitter. You can use anything. I'll have some cheap good ones linked down below that I've used in the past, but this is going to fit the frame and the overall profile of the frame really nicely, and it's just going to be an absolute sick beast. And plus this has a lot of crazy cool features, which is the reason why I'm putting it on to actually test it. Now also, I'll be using 2 race wire LEDs. These are really great, and the reason for that is these are salvaged motor from another frame right now because I really like these. Actually, I love these motors. And as you can tell, the motor wires are not going to fit into place. Now, if you don't know much about quadcopters, extending motor wires is actually a pain in the ass. However, with these race wire LED boards, we don't have to do that, which is going to be really great. What we'll do is just cut the motor wire right here, solder the motor right there, and then with the leftovers, we just solder them to this side and it'll go there. Not only that, it'll protect our motor wires as well. And you'll be like, well, why didn't you use all 4? Well, I actually kind of used another 2 for something else, and this is why I'm using 2 here because anyways, only 2 motors wires are not reaching. You get 4 of these for like $4, which is pretty crazy. And again, they're linked down below. Now for the camera, we're using a Hakcrc Monster Mini. It's linked down below. It's 20 bucks here, which is what's really great about this. It's a mini camera. However, this frame takes a full-fledged size camera, but it does come with the adapter, as you can tell right here in the packaging, and we're able to install it just fine. And these are really great cameras, and it's actually for a great deal right now, which is 21 bucks. So yeah, that's a new camera from a known brand for 20 bucks is insane, and especially to be a mini as well. Now for tools, if you've been watching my channel, I'd highly recommend you pick up one of these. These are really great. They give you every single tool head you'll need for any quadcopter from 1.5 to 3 millimeters. And what's really nice, it's interchangeable, and if you take it out to the field, it doesn't take much space, and they're titanium coated. And you need proper hex tools because if you strip a screw on the motor, you'll never be able to take it out and you'll never be able to tighten it again. Messing up one of these screws can render your whole quadcopter useless. Keep that in mind. It's very important. I've done that quite a lot when I first started. For receiver, I'm using an XM Plus radio. I highly recommend you pick up if you're in the fly sky. Once you have the cash and if you really like this stuff, go grab yourself an X9 Lite Pro. That's what I've been using. I have every single transmitter in the market, but the X9 Lite Pro is just my favorite. I have it linked down below. and it'll work with these little XM Plus radios, which are really cheap, and they get like 3 kilometers of range, so you're going to be totally fine in that perspective. Now for the soldering iron, I'm just going to show you how good this one is because I've been talking so much about it. I'm not going to use my big soldering station. I'm only going to use this. This is the TS100. I bought this when it was like 80 or 90 bucks. Right now it's like 50 bucks. What's so cool about this is this always stays in my backpack, and I can always just fix stuff in the field super easy, super quickly, heats up, and it works great even on big fat wires and big fat pads, which is something you want here. And this is only 50 bucks right now. Highly recommend. And I've built, I've used this as my main driver for a while, and I'm going to do it on my upcoming builds as well to show you how useful this thing can actually be, and that you don't need a full-fledged soldering station in order to solder this. So this is really awesome. And you could just plug in like some sort of a laptop power supply here and it'll work perfect. For tools also, this one here, I have it linked down below. I got it from Banggood. It's like $6, but it's really great. I've had it for about a year now, I think, or so. So it's been holding up very well. And you'll need something like this for the soldering iron, so you can just, clean it off, because you will need to clean it. And that's about it for the parts here. Also, for the flight footage, keep coming back and checking this video. It'll either be in the comments and the description once I go fly it. Same thing goes to every other build that you've watched on the channel. Right now, the weather is not really in my favor, so, it could take a couple days and some people might miss the upload, and then I just keep getting asked a lot. So keep that in mind as well. And, well, let's get started. PCBWay is one of the leading PCB manufacturers that I even use on a daily basis, not only to do my projects, but also some of the products that I've designed that's currently in the market, like the Drone Mesh VUSB, and I'm constantly using them for prototyping, and I'm also using their assembly services, and they also do have flashing services for specific hardware requirements, so it's a really great place to have your PCB manufactured or prototyped. So the first thing I always recommend you do is start off with the flight controller. After building so many quadcopters, starting out with the flight controller just makes everything so much easier here. Now what I like to do first is start applying solder to the pads. Now as you can tell, this was a used flight controller here, so what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to retouch the pads here as well. Now if you take a look at what I'm using on my table right now, you'll see it in most of my videos. This is a silicone pad, which I highly recommend for anyone. And as you can tell, it does get dirty, but you just wipe it with a wet cloth and then it gets brand new. And this is where I do all my reviews. So you actually see this quite often on the channel. And to be honest, this little silicone pad is a must have because it also just allows things not to move. And as you can tell, I don't need helping hands or anything in order to solder. All right, so now let's go ahead and start with the camera wire. So we're going to get the camera wire. This is the camera wire that came with it. As you can tell, we have this little thing coming out. This is for the OSD, so we can change the settings of the camera, which we're not going to need. And you see we have 3 colors: red, black, and yellow. So red is always 5 volt, yellow is always video, and black is always ground. So we can see here we have ground, 5 volt, and V in, which are these 3 right here, and that's what we're going to solder them. So ground is going to be the black. Now before you start soldering your wires here, I recommend you strip them, or first cut them to length, strip them, twist them, and add solder to them. So I've already done that step here, just to save us a little time. Now a really nice technique is to heat up the pad before you add the wire onto it. So for example, right now I'm going to heat up the pad, but my thing went into sleep mode. After I heat up the ground or the pad, I would lift up the soldering iron, put the wire into place, and then push both of them in together. It's okay if you leave the soldering iron there for a little bit long. It's not going to make a really big problem. As you can tell, this wire is a bit too long here, and I kind of just want to make it a little bit shorter. Now never cut on top of the flight controller or any electronics, so keep that in mind as well. That's something very important because that could create an absolute nightmare if it gets jammed somewhere it's not supposed to, and it'll create a big short circuit and you could ruin your whole build. All right, so now we're going to do the 5 volt here. Very nice. Here's the V in, because now again we're connecting the camera here, and I really want to just add, I want to make sure I heat up that ground wire really good, because like I mentioned before, the ground plane is just everywhere. And there we go, that got pretty toasty. So like this, now we have our camera connected here. So we see ground, 5 volt, and VIN, so the video input. So here we're done with this. Now let's grab our VTX here and let's connect our connector and see what wire does what. So here's our video transmitter here. Now all the way on the bottom is the DC in, which means the battery voltage. So the next one is ground. That's going to be connected to any ground pad. Then we have SA, which stands for smart audio. You don't have to connect this, but if you do, it makes things so much nicer because you'll be able to change the power output and change the channel through the on-screen display from your quadcopter instead of coming here and pressing these buttons to change the channel and power. So you don't have to connect that if you don't want to, but I'm going to show you how to connect it. Then we have another 5 volt in ground, which we will remove here because we don't need these. These are meant to give your camera power, but we gave the power to the camera from the flight controller here. So those wires we're going to actually remove from the connector. I'll show you how to do that. And the last one is video. So basically what's going to happen is the video is going to come in from the camera here, and then it's going to go to this OSD chip, put all the on-screen display stuff like your battery voltage and everything, and then pop it out through the V out here, which is going to come here, and it'll go to the antenna and down to your goggles. So hopefully that made sense to most people here. So what we want to do is we want to remove these two wires, the 5-volt and ground next to the video, because we don't need these. You could keep them, but I highly recommend you remove them, which is better. So we need to remove these two right here, the ones next to the video. So what we can do is we can come to the, you could cut them off, but I highly recommend not to cut them off. The best way to do this is to bring, like tweezers. I'll have some link down below, and then lift up the plastic piece. It's going to be a little bit difficult for you to see. You just lift up that plastic piece, and then you can go ahead and pull it out. So I'll just zoom out a little bit. Here's another example. I'm going to lift up the plastic piece here, and then pull the wire that I don't need. And now I'm good in that perspective. I could push them back into place. So now we just have our 4 wires that we need, which is the power for the video transmitter, the smart audio, and the video line. And we can just double check this by inserting it into place. So we see the first one is video, ground, and 5-volt, which we removed, those two. Then smart audio, ground, and the input voltage. All right, so now we have the connector that we were just modifying, and let's start installing it here. Now, if you're right-handed, I always recommend you start from the left side, because the soldering iron will be held with this hand, and it'll just make wire by wire easier. So obviously, if you started from here and then you want to move here, then you have a chance of actually the soldering iron hitting this side. And if you're left-handed, you do the opposite. So right now we can see that this one is going to be ground. So this is right there, ground. So this is going to be ground here. So that's going to be our black wire. So let's grab our black wire here, and there it is. And we're just gonna hold it into place. Now remember, just always keep in mind that the ground pads, you're gonna have to hold a little bit longer than everything else. See, I had to hold it a little bit longer here. And there we go. And I think that's not clean. Now you have to excuse me because the thing is really, really far away from me. So I could barely see at times. So here we go. We have our ground into place, and I just want to double check this. Okay, it looks great. Now, what's really cool is that these video transmitters take battery voltage. However, with this flight controller here, we have something called a 9-volt regulator. So that will clean out the video feed for us, which is something super awesome to have. Now, as you can tell, I'm just going to add a little bit more solder on the 9-volt pad here, because it just needs a little bit more. There we go. And I'm going to grab my red wire, because that's going to be the input, because this is a battery voltage VTX, but now we're giving it the 9-volt. And then here the video out, which is going to be the yellow wire, so V out. So let's see, probably needed a little bit more solder on that, but no, that's fine. There we go. Now we have video out. So now we're left with the blue wire, which was the smart audio. So what are we going to do with this? Well, smart audio needs to go on a TX pad. Now the TX pad must be available. And what do I mean by that? Well, for example, let's pretend we put our receiver on RX1. And then we still see that there is a TX1 available. But in reality, the TX1 now is taken because the RX1 has been taken. So this is what I mean by an available one. So we're not using the RX1 for anything, so we can put it on the TX1 right here. So let's go ahead and set that up. So that's where the smart audio would connect. Now you're like, why does it connect to a T pad and not R? Well, the T pad is transmit data. So we're gonna have, the flight controller has to transmit data to tell it that, oh, you need to change the channel. And the R is for receiving. So right now we have like this, we have our camera and our video wires done, our video transmitter wires done. Next thing we wanna do is let's do our receiver here. Now this is an F4 flight controller, so that means you have to take something into consideration here. Now S-bus cannot be connected anywhere, neither I-bus. It has to go to a specific area on F4 microcontroller units or F4 flight controllers. For example, here we see that it already tells us where the S-bus would go, right there. And that's where we want to connect our signal, and obviously 5-volt and ground. Now, if you had an I-bus receiver, like a FlySky receiver, and you plugged it in here, it won't work. And that is because the signal is inverted on S-bus, and on I-bus it's not inverted. So keep that in mind. But an F7, you could connect it to any R pad. Both of them, doesn't matter. So if you had I-bus, you would want to put it up here on the RX2. And if you had S-Bus like me, which is FRSky, then I'm going to want to put it down here, my signal pad. So on the XM Plus, it would look like this. We have our S-Bus signal, the green wire, 5 volt is the red wire, and the black wire is the ground. So let's do this. And again, it's recommended to start from the left if you are right-handed like me, and that's what I'm going to do also. So I'm going to just add a little bit of solder to clean these up. There we go. Want everything to look nice and shiny, nice and new. So here's this one. I'm going to touch the pad first, then I'm going to bring in the wire up top, and then just apply a bunch of pressure until it holds into place. Awesome. Next one is our 5 volt. Now, as you can tell, the size is really nice of this wire, but I want it to be a little bit shorter. I don't need it to be that long. And again, don't cut on top of electronics. That's why I moved it there. So here we go. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the pad first, and then come in with the wire, and then push the wire on top, wait for it to all melt together. Awesome. Now we have our 5 volt underground for our receiver. The last thing we want to do is install our signal, which is going to go to the S-Bus, because obviously this is S-Bus. And now we're basically kind of done, really. All we need to do is connect the motors later on, and let's take a look at this. So here will be the camera, here will be the video transmitter, and here's the receiver itself. So now you'll be like, how do we apply power to this guy and at the same time apply power to the ESC without losing a lot of power? Well, this is where it gets pretty interesting, and this is why I really wanted to cover this, because I don't think there's a lot of information out there. So we're going to have to give the direct battery voltage here. So we're going to have to connect this XT60 connector to this here and not to this. And what we're going to do is we're going to give this power through these really tiny little wires that are coming from the ESC. And I'll explain why in a bit. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and prepare the ESC. So we're going to add solder to the ESC here, and then we'll take it one step at a time. All right, so now let's go ahead and start adding solder to the ESC here. Now I've gone ahead and prepared the soldering iron. And what we want to do is just want to touch the pad and allow everything to sink in just like that. So I like to touch half of the pad with the soldering iron and then bring in the solder on the pad, or sometimes even touch the soldering iron and allow that to work. And I'm still touching the pad. Don't just, go like this, because I've also seen my assistant do that where he's just like, he thinks he can't touch it for a very long time. But no, you could totally do that, because you need to. You need to have a really good connection. You need them to be really shiny, and that's just going to make for an overall better and clean build here. And you need to put like a little blob to stick out a little bit. And don't forget to keep cleaning the tip here. Now I'm just going to flip it over to make my life a little bit easier. So if you're wondering what solder I use this one, 6040 here, with 2% flux. It's really great, actually. I get it from Tesco, so you probably find some of this stuff at Walmart and stuff. But I just get mine from Tesco every time I go. Actually, it's really great solder. As you can tell, it just melts and it does everything I want it to do. Never had any problems with it. So there we go. Really nice and easy. Awesome. All right, so now we can go to the back side here. Now I'd highly recommend to actually remove these standoffs. It'll make our life a little bit easier, which I'll do in a bit once we're gonna start soldering in the battery connection here. So the ground might be a little bit harder. Now take note of your soldering iron, because you can tell I'm coming in, I'm going to melt that standoff right there. So I'm just gonna see right now, I just burned myself, something just popped up. All right, ouch. So it's getting so hot that the flux is just melting. So as you can tell here, we have a little problem right now, but I'll explain what this problem is. As you can tell, it went flat. So the reason why it went flat is because there's holes on the pad. So everything's on the bottom now. So you don't want to keep the soldering iron on there for too long, or else that'll happen. Now a nice trick to get it back on the other side is to let gravity do it. So we can flip this back over. And luckily I can get kind of a line of sight from this little hole right here. And I'm just going to touch this, and it's going to go to the other side. Just like that. And I'm going to touch this one also. Make sure they go to the other side. And you need to double check the bottom always, because sometimes you can have them connect with each other, and then you'll have a short circuit without you even ever knowing. So now you can tell they're back on top here, looking really nice and shiny. So that's a really nice trick to get that done here. So right now we're going to do one motor together. we're actually going to do the motors differently. We're going to do 2 motors with the same thing. We're going to connect them directly. And the front motors, because they don't reach, we will be using the LED wire here. So let's start with this one right here. Now also something to take note of here, which is very important, is the number order on the ESC. So you have to find your front of the quadcopter. So we know the front's here because that's where the camera plates are going to go. And you have to find motor 1. Motor 1 is always the bottom right. So it goes motor 1, 2, 3, 4. So you don't have any issues that way when you plug it in, because it'll never fly unless you know what you're doing. So make sure you always follow that. If you take a closer look, you'll see M1, M2, M3, M4, and that's perfect. That's the orientation supposed to be. Because if we flipped it here, then everything will be all screwed up. And then unless you know what to do, don't do that. So right now let's start with this little motor right here. So again, I'm going to heat up the pad first. Then I'm going to bring in the wire and just push that wire and just listen to that beautiful sound here. There we go. And the wire orientation order doesn't really matter right now. We can do that later. What you can do is you can change it in BL Heli, or you can just replace any 2 wires in order to flip the motor orientation. So you can do it many ways here. There we go, really nice, nothing's touching. So like this, we have our back motors into place. We'll fix it up, make it nice and a little bit later. So now what we see is that we don't have long enough wires to make it all the way up here. So this is where this is going to come in handy. And you have to take something into consideration, is watch the bottom side here. We need to insulate these, because if it's touching carbon, that's just a direct short circuit. So we're going to add some more tape, electrical tape. And unfortunately, I don't have any more black, so it's going to be yellow here. But it's also good to use really vibrant colors, because if you lose this in a field, it makes it a little bit easier for you to find. So I'm just going to add some tape and I'll be right back, and then we take it from there. All right, so now it's the race wire LEDs that we're going to start setting up here. Now, like I mentioned before, these will not reach all the way up here. So what I've done is I've just added a small zip tie right now to hold it into place. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut the motor wires right there. And as you can tell, I have electrical tape below it so it doesn't short circuit on the other side and touch the carbon fiber, because carbon fiber is conductive. So right now I'm going to cut the motor wire right about here, I think, just a little bit longer than the pads themselves. So all right, so now we're going to prepare the motors. I've already taken them out and I've cut them off camera because I just needed to get the size just right here, so you can tell right there. So a really nice way to add solder to wires is I'd have the solder levitating up in the air. Make sure nothing is around that area, because sometimes solder tends to jump to places you don't really want it to. So make sure they're twisted and obviously and stripped. And what I like to do is I start touching the solder right here and then just move down while I'm holding the solder and touching the wire at the same time, just like this. Hopefully you guys are seeing that. As you can tell, you see that solder just splatter over there. I'm just going to clean the tip here a little bit. So now this motor wire has some solder on it. I'm just going to add a little bit more. I'm going to do the same thing to the other ones also. I'll skip the second motor, but this is just a way to kind of get an idea of how I'm doing it here. There we go. So that's really nice. Actually, let's just continue on with this one. Also, don't throw away the motor wires that we just cut, because we're obviously going to use them as the extension from here to the ESC. So right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add solder to the pads of the race wire here. Okay, there we go. Make sure nothing is touching. That looks great. I'm just double checking. Okay. So now I can just bring in this one here. I heat up the pad first, then I'm going to touch the motor wire onto place. And it's really nice if you used a tweezer instead, because the motor wire, see, as you can tell, really likes to move around here. There we go. So we're going to do this again here. Very nice. We're going to do the next one over. As you can tell, again, I'm starting from the left and moving right because it just makes it a lot easier. We could have actually trimmed these motor wires a little bit more. Would have been possibly a little bit better here. There we go. Very nice. Okay. So I'm just going to double check them now. So they don't look really great because there's some strands sticking out in the middle here. Gonna push those away and add a little bit of solder here. You can see those strands. That's why you got to twist it very, very good here. You can usually bend them back into place. Try to avoid them from making an issue. There we go. I'm just gonna double check again. Not the best job ever, but I'll let it pass. All right, so now let's go to the other side here. And again, we're gonna start by adding solder. So here's the first pad. Don't wanna heat this up too much because it's gonna seep through. You can see how those connected and I just easily. So now I'm gonna bring in the wires that we've cut off the motor and I'm just gonna put them into place here. Here's the first one. Here is the second one. It can get a little bit tricky at times, so just be careful. Take your time also. I don't know if they're touching, I'll see that in a little bit. It's because everything is really, really far away from me in order to get the best angle for you guys. Okay. All right, so that actually came out pretty good here. So next thing, want to grab these, cut them to length as much as we need, and we're gonna solder them here. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the other motor real quick, and then we'll come back to this step here. All right guys, so I've kind of skipped over this part because it was just a nightmare on camera. So I've gotten connected all the way to the ESC here from this side. Doesn't matter the orientation, it's totally fine here. And there we go, now we have the motors into place. So next thing we wanna do is we actually wanna go to the XT60 where our battery is going to be connected. And I've 3D printed this part in order for it to hold on the side so it doesn't risk a wire going over and then getting hit by the propeller. So right now what I'm doing is, again, these 3D files are also linked down below. So I'm going to start with the positive here because the negative is going to be a little bit further and so we don't have it in the way. So right now I'm actually going to flip this like this because then my soldering iron could come in flat like this here. I'm going to heat up the pad. And I'm gonna just start. Now this wire is gonna take possibly some time to heat up, but actually no, it didn't. That's really nice. There we go, make sure it fits flush. Got really hot, that's why you should always use tweezers here. So keep the mistakes so you guys could see them. Now and again, most of the solder now is on the bottom there. And here we have some strands because I didn't twist this wire. Very good. Now here's a really nice trick you can do. For example, we can, since we don't like how much solder is on top of it, what we can do is hold the soldering iron, apply as much pressure as possible so it doesn't move, and then add solder and then quickly come in and grab the wire. Most of it probably went down to the bottom now. So we're just gonna see what happened on the bottom here. Yeah, most of it is on the bottom right there. Can you see that? So I'm just gonna come in again. I'm just gonna try to move as much of it away. Gravity won't really work. There we go, the whole wire came off now. So you gotta be very careful with these, especially the ones with holes where the pads are. They can make things a little bit harder than usual. So we don't wanna stay there for too long. So I'm gonna actually try not to hold the pad here. And this time start with my tweezer so I don't risk letting go at a wrong time and then having to reheat it and it gets too hot and then it goes back to the bottom again. So I'm just gonna align it. There we go, looks nice. That's it. That's good, because this soldering iron is a hell of a beast. I mean, you know, it doesn't hinder your performance whatsoever, which is pretty crazy. So the ground's gonna be a little bit more difficult because obviously the ground is a little bit harder to heat up because of the heat dissipation. So I'm going to start with the wire here, and it's going to be a little bit hard. See, we can see it starting to melt. Come on, take form or take shape. You got to be careful because if I let go of the ground, all that solder is going to splatter on my face if it just whiplashes. So you better make sure you have a good hold on it because you don't want this stuff to go in your eye. I mean, just on your hand, it burns like crap. Now, this wasn't the best of jobs, but I'll clean it off camera. As long as nothing is touching, then I'm totally happy with that. But we can see, I'm afraid now because it could just immediately just flip off from under the soldering iron, flip up and just splatter solder everywhere, hot molten solder. So you got to be very careful with that. So now that's into place and we're basically done. We just have to put it all together. However, I left the hardest thing for last, which is this thing here. Now this right here is what's going to give the flight controller power and connect the ESCs or the motor signal to the flight controller. So this is where it gets kind of interesting. Usually on stacks or flight control and ESCs that come together, they just have a 2-pin connector that connects. However, this one is a manual process here because we're using an all-in-one flight controller. All right, so now I've plugged this one in. Now, if we take a look at the data sheet of the ESC here that's on the website, we see that this is going to be battery voltage, this red one. This one's going to be, this white one's going to be current, so we're going to move it to the side, we don't need it. And this is going to be the ground. So these two are battery voltage. So the battery would come in through here and come out through these 2 wires right here. And we could connect those right there to give that battery. So let's actually, I think, should we do that first? Yeah, let's do that first. Let's do these 2 first. So this is going to apply power here. And we can just, you know, put this right here. It doesn't matter the orientation just yet. So we can just place it in, just to hold it into place for us. Now this might be a little bit too long. We might want to shorten this out, but we also want to make sure we're pointing the right way. So we're actually going to be pointing this way here when we're actually going to install it. So I'm going to want this to be like right about, actually no, we can keep it the same way, because what we can do is I'm just going to twist these 2 together here. So we're going to twist the positive and negative that's coming from the ESC together. And I'm going to wrap it like this here. And then we'll go ahead and give the positive and negative to the flight controller here. So there we go. These are already soldered. That's really nice. They came from the manufacturer just like that. So I'm just going to heat up this whole big ass pad right here just to add this little tiny wire. Boom. Nice. And then here we'll do the same thing to the positive. Boom. Nice. So that's it. So now our flight controller also has power here. So now you can see that the ESC is actually giving the flight controller power. Now we need to find motor 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I know for a fact it's the last 4 here. However, they're not in the correct order. So we need to double check this one by one here. So for example, if on the data sheet of this it said, or the spec sheet it says, or the manual it says this, the first one from that side is motor 1, then we're going to take this wire here. This is just theoretical right now. We'll say this it says this is motor 1 or ESC 1. Then we're going to have to find S1, which is right there. And then we would solder that right there. So let me double check the spec sheet here and we'll cover it right now. All right, so on the spec sheet, it tells me that this one right here is motor 2 actually, which is the first one, which is kind of strange. Usually they come in the correct order, but I find that kind of strange here. Okay, so this is motor, it says motor 2 here, and then the next one over is motor 4. All right, so right now what I have in my hand, the manual says this is motor 2, so it's going to go on pad S2, which is this one right here. So I'm just going to heat that up and plug it into place. Boom, we're done here. Now let's grab this and just open it again. So the next wire down on the manual here says that it's motor 4. Yeah, motor 4. So this is going to be motor 4 right here. And if we bring everything back, we see that motor 4 is up in the front right here. And let's go ahead and do that as well. This is S4 right there. So I'm just going to solder that into place. This is very good to understand because that's how we used to build them back then. All right, so that's motor 4. And the next one over is going to be motor 1, it says. So the third one down is motor 1. So it's going to be this one right here. So this one is motor 1. And where's motor 1? So that one's going to be this pad right there. So here's motor 1. I wish they would have color coded all of them a little bit better instead of yellow, green, I mean white, green, white, green. And then the last one in the list here is going to be motor 3. So motor 3 is going to be that one, and it's the only one that's not connected. So we're going to solder it to that little blob right there. Make sure not to hit any components because there are some stuff that's super close. There we go. Now all of the ESC connections have been wired up. So we still have a couple more wires left from the ESC here. We have these two here. So one of them is for the current draw, and I don't want to cover that in this video. And the yellow one here, it says NC. NC means not connected. That means it's not doing anything. So let's just unplug this little connector here. And what we're going to do is just going to remove those wires that we're not using. There we go. All right, so I've gone ahead and removed them. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this back up here. All right, so like this, basically we're done. We could bring in our camera here and find the camera wire, which is this guy right there. Plug it in. Awesome. I'm going to put it down here. Great. And now our VTX is this one right here. Should have probably been a little bit longer. I think would have been a little bit better here, because we will probably need it to be a little bit longer than that. Alright guys, so I had to do a little bit more modifications. The reason for that is the connector that they're provided with the video transmitter doesn't reach all the way where I want it to. So I found, I've repurposed most of the camera wires because they are silicone, and there was just still a bunch left. And as you can tell, now it reaches the bottom here. So what I want to do with the VTX now is I've added some double-sided tape. However, if you're using the same type of VTX, take note of this hole. This is actually the microphone here, and it does send audio back. This is the best video transmitter with the best microphone currently in the market right now. So what we want to do is you want to make sure you put it on the other side, and we just have it in place, and that's double side. That's not going to go anywhere here. And that's really nice in that perspective. So the next thing we want to do is we want to grab our receiver. Now I'm thinking of heat shrinking it, but always before heat shrinking it, you should definitely bind to make your life easier. However, what I'll do is I'll probably just heat shrink it to here, and then after I bind it, then I'll add another heat shrink on top. So we're just going to leave that real quick for now. So we're going to need 2 zip ties here. And we're just going to put one facing that way. I like to keep the head on the bottom here. So here we have one. You don't want to tighten this too much. Just, you don't want to rip a wire here, because that'll just be a nightmare. So there we go. I think that's good. That's not going anywhere. So I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, because this is how we're going to mount our antennas right now. So as you can tell here, we have 2 zip ties into place. These aren't going to go anywhere. I'm going to trim them slightly here. About here is going to be good for now. We'll trim them a little bit more later on, just right now, so we can make our life a little bit easier. We're also going to need some heat shrink for the antennas. And I'll have a link to the pack that I use. One pack lasts me more than 1 year on trillion builds and other things as well. So yeah, so I'm just going to heat shrink the first heat shrink that's on the receiver here. And as you can tell, I've kept the bind button exposed, so it can make my life a little bit easier. So now I'm getting myself another double-sided tape here, just to put on the bottom side. Alright, I'm going to bring it to this side. I'm going to bend these a little bit. There we go. So here we go. Now we have our receiver into place. And then these antennas now, what we can do is we'll grab our little heat shrinks that I showed you earlier, and we can start just inserting them into the correct place. I actually want it to go backwards. I want to go through this one first. So here we should have actually kept the zip tie a little bit longer, but that's totally fine, because we're just going to use 2 heat shrinks. We'll shrink the first one, and then the next one we'll bring on top here. So as you can tell, now they're being routed through very nicely. Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and use my hot air gun. You can use a lighter also. You got to make sure you shrink all sides here. It's very satisfying to watch. Okay. Now, while my hot air is also running, I'm going to grab the last one here and put it into place here. I think that's going to be good for this one here. Alright, and now we can do the other one as well. Alright, so believe it or not, we're basically done here. We're just going to have to, like, do the binding and the programming stuff, which I'll keep for a separate video, because I think this video was like hella long, but I'm not sure. Alright, so we have these into place. Now, one more thing we need to add is the SMA port for the VTX here. Now, always make sure your antenna is connected to the VTX before booting up your quadcopter, or else you could burn the VTX. So keep that in mind, and that's very important here. So there we go. Alright guys, so here's the completed quadcopter. Now as you can tell, the 3D printed parts are really helping out. Part will hold the XT60 from not bending over and getting hit by a propeller, nor the battery's wires here. So that's what's really nice about this. It was like a 5-7 minute thing to print. Also back here, this was supposed to meant for some sort of VTX, but then I just utilized the hole here to keep the antenna. It does have some give, which is really great. In case you crash, it's not immediately gonna, the antenna won't take the full impact of the crash. So that's also really cool. LEDs here, I'll show you guys later once we take it out fly. These actually turn red. The more power goes to the motor, the brighter it gets, which is pretty cool. So if you really want this quadcopter, there's a chance where you might have it. So this will end up in possibly 2 places. It'll either end up for my Patreon as this month's giveaway with the Sky Zone OLEDs, or it might end up in my secret shop because I have something more premium to give away to my Patreons. And my secret shop has these things for like super cheap, crazy prices. So just to give back to the community and allow people to get in the air who don't have much money. So something like, you know, a $300 quadcopter, you could probably get it for like 170 bucks after I build it and test it. And it's a really nice way to support the channel here. So this is going to be a really nice little beast. Hopefully it's going to fly great. I know it'll fly great because it's TrueX. I've used to fly this one on stock beta flight. It was pretty good. And we'll get to see that in the upcoming days, possibly tomorrow or after tomorrow. I'll take this one out flying along with the fly route. And also for the flight footage, make sure you come back to the video. I'll have the flight video updated in the description below and in the pinned comment down below on this video if you can't find the flight footage of this specific quadcopter. And everything is linked down below. I'll also leave you guys some flight footage of these motors a while ago that I had, so you can check out how well these actually flew, because they are some pretty insane motors. And I'm gonna leave it at that, guys. If you guys have any questions or any suggestions, feel free to let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.